Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Kelly Stewart, joined right off the bat by Matt Zimmer of the Argus Leader. And up in our Fargo studios, we have Jeff Kolpack from the Forum of Fargo-Moorhead here to preview the Dakota Marker. So thanks for coming in, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. Is that you, Zim? I didn't recognize you in the nice vest.
He's fancy.
Yeah.
Looking all fancy today.
Someone bet me I couldn't outdress Kelly Stewart. So.
Oh,
I
man,
missed
I'm
the
bringing it
Fitzpatrick
today.
beard. Where's the Fitzpatrick beard? Come on.
Oh, my God.
Dakota Marker week. I got to clean it up.
You're right,
Exactly.
you're right.
All right, well, talking about this Dakota Marker, South Dakota State, North Dakota State, first of all, they're rivals. Second of all, they're FCS powerhouses, ranked number 1 and number 3. But also, we just happen to have the number 1 offense in the nation versus the number 1 passing defense in the nation. So literally the perfect storm. Matt, we'll start with you. What's the key for the Jacks to have a successful passing game?
Well, first of all, I think they're number 1 in the offense and everything after they scored 90 points last week, the last time they played. But
let's not talk about that.
Yeah, those numbers are a little skewed. But you know, you're right. It is kind of a matchup of strengths when you get these two teams together, and it often is. To answer your question, what's the key there? They got to protect Taryn Christian. You know, I mean, it's every time they've played these guys, they've gone into it knowing that North Dakota State has a terrific pass rush. I think they have 12 sacks through 3 games, and South Dakota State's offensive line, they've only played 2 games this year. They had the cancellation, then the bye week, and then obviously the one game, the 90-6. It's hard to really know how much you can take from a game like that. So a lot of SDSU on both sides of the ball is still kind of unproven. We're still kind of trying to figure out how good they are in a lot of areas. That offensive line graduated its 2 best players from last year.
Yeah.
So I think the early returns have been pretty positive, but they haven't had any kind of test like they're going to get up in Fargo. So that'll be the big thing. Obviously Taryn Christian's their best player. He's the guy they need to carry the load, and for him to be able to do that, they're going to have to give him time to throw.
That'll be huge. And Jeff, Matt alluded to it a little bit, but how do the Bisons slow down that SDSU passing game? Elaborate that on a little more.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, first of all, it starts with Greg Menard. He's the senior defensive end who missed this game last year. In fact, NDSU, I think their best hope this game is they have some players that didn't play in the game last year. You have Menard, you have linebacker Dan Marlette, and I think the biggest one is linebacker Jabril Cox, who was suspended for the first half of last year because of a targeting penalty in the game before and really did get into the flow of the game. He's the best player on NDSU's team, and he's one of the most talented players in the FCS. To me, this game, I think, comes down to really Taryn Christian against Jabril Cox. If I were NDSU, I'd take Cox, the linebacker, like they did in the FCS title game against James Madison and Brian Shore, as kind of a spy role. So wherever Taryn Christian goes, I would look for number 42 on defense for NDSU.
Well, let's talk about Taryn Christian a little bit. I actually want to talk about both quarterbacks because they're going to play a critical role, obviously. Taryn Christian, first team All-Valley. Easton Stick, second team All-Valley preseason. But Christian played well last year. Stick did not. So, Matt, we'll start with you. What do these quarterbacks need to do for their teams to win?
They had to limit turnovers. That was the difference last year. Taryn Christian didn't turn the ball over. Easton Stick threw 3 interceptions. And, there's been a lot of talk about that this week. I'm sure Easton Stick is very motivated. I'm sure he's watched a lot of film to try and make sure that doesn't happen again. And Taryn Christian knows, he's played against these guys 3 times, and twice he's won, and those have been in the regular season matchups. He was the key both times. When they went up there a couple years ago and won, he rushed for 141 yards. I don't think they were really prepared for that at the time.
Yeah.
Now last year they didn't have that element of surprise. They just kind of out-executed them, outplayed them. So now this year it'll be interesting. I mean, you don't have Jake Winicky, you don't have Dallas Goddard, and those guys were such huge parts of what they did the last couple of years. Does that mean that there will be some other element of surprise this year like there was a couple years ago? I don't know. But I still think, kind of as you alluded to, whatever they do, it's going to go through Taryn Christian. And for him to be successful, he's got to make sure he takes care of the football.
Well, Jeff, talking about Easton Stick, I mean, obviously he did not have a great game last year. Lost the battle, won the war, and that they won the national championship. But knowing him as a player, he is a mature quarterback. Is that kind of in the back of his mind of, hey, it's on his home turf now. He wants to play well in this Marker game. How's he approaching it?
No question. I mean, we talked to him yesterday, and he said last year, yeah, I had a bad Saturday, and you can't really do that at this level no matter who you play. You turn the ball over, you're going to lose. These 2 guys, they're like the perfect human beings. They're like very well-mannered. They're They're scholarly, they do community work, they're gentlemen. I mean, it's just amazing. There's just no kink in the armor in these two guys at all. They're two veteran guys. They're both leaders on their team. Stick is a 2 or 3 year captain. Christian's a captain. You know, I've never seen a game like this where you've had two quarterbacks on each side who are just so solid, so stout in what they do. I think it's going to come down to really if there's a defense out there that can stop the other team's attack. These two quarterbacks are going to show up. I think you know that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be big. And it's interesting because the Dakota Marker is usually a game we see later in the season. Right. And so you see these teams going into it this year, and they've played some pretty lopsided games so far. It's tough to gauge the matchup. So for you guys, what's the one thing to look for early as these teams feel each other out? Zim, what do you think?
I think maybe keeping an eye on the SDSU defense because so far they've played great, but like we said, they haven't been tested a lot.
Yeah.
You know, Iowa State drove right down the field and scored on them, and then that game got rained out after 5 minutes. Montana State was supposed to be a really good team. They shut them down, but Montana State didn't have their quarterback that day. And in the games that they've played since then, when they have had their quarterback, it's been clear that they're a much different team. So it's hard to judge that performance. And then now, obviously, in their most recent game, they played a team that was just heavily overmatched in a rebuilding situation. They didn't have their quarterback either. So, you know, I think, again, SDSU is probably happy with how they've played defensively so far, but the degree of difficulty is going to get ramped up so highly, so quickly. This is the conference opener. They're coming off a bye. It's easy to say, oh, they're well-rested and healthy and prepared for the game, and sure they are, but I think it's definitely fair to wonder how they're going to respond, especially in a hostile environment up at the Fargo Dome, to a much, much better offense than they've faced so far.
Well, Jeff, obviously we want to see the SDSU defense, but for an NDSU perspective, what are you looking for early from the Bison?
The Bison passing game, specifically because we all know NDSU's ran the ball since the 1960s, and both these teams have done the same things for 20, 30 years. I'm sure Stiegelmeier and Chris Kleiman, you really almost don't even have to watch tape anymore. You know exactly what they're going to do. You really don't. I mean, and Stiegelmeier told me that today. He goes, well, we really don't need to see a whole lot because we know what they're going to do, and vice versa. So the key is for NDSU in their passing game. If I'm South Dakota State, you look at NDSU's running backs. You know, Bruce Anderson, Lance Dunn, they're very dynamic. I'm sure they're going to load up and say, try to beat you with your right arm, Easton. Because NDSU's receivers, they've never really had a Winicky in the last couple of years. Nobody that really could kill you deep. Darius Shepard's been really good. After that, it's unproven. So if I'm South Dakota State, I'm saying make you beat me with the pass.
Yeah, you gotta love those games though, where the teams are just such high quality that it's a matter of who's going to execute those little things better, and that's going to be the winner. So that's going to be fun to watch on Saturday. Well, we talked about the quarterbacks already. You talked about Jabril Cox as kind of an X factor for NDSU that's not a quarterback. How about for South Dakota State? Who is an X factor that's not Taryn Christian?
I think maybe Brandon Snyder, their strong safety. He's a guy who, when the season started, was an Iowa Hawkeye. Then kind of some things transpired that he had to leave that program, grad transferred to South Dakota State. But it's not a typical grad transfer where, you know, it's playing time or whatever. I mean, he started. He was a Big Ten starting safety. So you don't often get players like that on the South Dakota State defense. And we just got done talking about how you kind of know what the Bison are going to do. They're going to try to run the football. Well, it's good to have a physical safety, a guy who's played in the Big Ten like Brandon Snyder, but also, as Jeff mentioned, they're going to try to throw the ball so the Jacks can't just load up the box all the time. Well, this is a guy who's made plays in Big Ten games before as a defensive back, covering the pass too. So if he's as good as the Jacks think he is, or hope he can be, you know, a Big Ten caliber player, he could really be a big factor in this game as kind of a two-way guy who can come down on the line of scrimmage and play against the run or play back and be a factor in the passing game.
Love it. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming in, giving us your perspective on the Dakota Marker. It's going to be a great game.